Hey everyone, welcome back to Behind Open Doors, where we are a podcast trying to take you behind the scenes of what it takes to multiply followers, leaders, and churches. Now, we're going to be very honest with you on this episode. We have been talking a whole lot about followership and what it means to develop followers of Christ, and what does this concept of followership look like sort of intertwined into our lives, into our churches, into leadership. Last episode, we talked about plurality in leadership and how that is really the foundation of multiplying followership, making sure that the people in charge are on board with this. Humility, deference, zeal, engagement, mission ownership, and all these things, and creating a culture of followership that multiplies, which means we have to develop healthy leaders and healthy followers in order to see that happen. Sort of, Paul and Timothy, for 2 Timothy 2:2, where you heard from me, now teach others who will teach faithful men, teach others also. That, whatever, I messed that up, but you get the idea. It's truly followership that multiplies, right? So we're now going to take that topic and apply it to missions, and specifically international missions. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that really looks like for Multiply itself. And admit at the front end of this, this is a condition where we're sort of building the plane as we're flying it. And not that we don't know what we're doing, but there are times where Nick and I look at each other like, how do we do this? Oh, let's get to the whiteboard and figure this out. I don't know. So Nick, president of Multiply, Aaron, executive director, and we're going to figure this out with you over the next 30 minutes or so, and then we're all going to know how to do this in international missions, right?
Yeah, sure. We'll think 30 minutes is all it takes. I've been at it, maybe over 10 years, and I'm still trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like an expert yet, for sure.
Well, I think we're all in the club together now. I'm not seeing this done elsewhere. I'm doing a lot of research right now on leadership, followership, and lots of different sort of categories. I'm definitely not seeing this talked about on the as churches do work in cross-cultural missions. I'm not seeing the topic of followership anywhere at all.
No, I've never experienced it ever.
So I'd like to say, we are so good. We got this thing licked. We know what we're we don't know what we're doing. Nobody does, apparently.
Yeah.
And we're trying to figure this out. So let's do that right now.
So yeah, when I start thinking about this topic and missions and Multiply in general, I go back to before the beginning, I would say, right? And this, to be honest, this perspective is newer to me even, and it's been really helpful for me, right? Thinking about why do we do missions, what is missions, that kind of stuff. But it's not as boring as it might sound, because I think we fall into some of the same stuff we've been talking about, some of the same sort of fallacies where missions becomes very leadership centric. It becomes very apostolic centric. It's equipping the leaders to be those strong leaders who go push out and just keep being a leader and keep being a grower and that kind of thing. And so I go back to even before creation, actually. And maybe we don't talk about this a lot either in the kind of Christian world necessarily, but God had a family before he created earth, right? Mm-hmm. We know this from like Job, where God's, he's not talking to himself, he's talking to other spiritual beings, and they're talking about like God asked Job, oh, you must have been there when I was hanging out with the angels and creating the foundations of the earth, right? God's being sarcastic, which God can do. And
insert great song, by the way, by a band named Ghost Ship called Where Were You? Story of Job. It's super powerful, super cool. Go listen to it.
Helpful.
Yeah.
Great. And a biblical theology involved. I love it. Exactly. And so God had this family where they, and they weren't on earth. They were somewhere before the earth was created. And this we know about God's nature, right? That he is the God of gods. He's the father of spiritual beings as well as humans. And so before humans were even created, God was, I like to think about God as sort of just hanging out with his family, loving his family, having things in common with his family, and being in a loving, connected relationship together, right? Then he's like, you know what? I want to do this again, sort of. I want to do it with these humans, and I'm going to make them in our likeness, or the likeness of these spiritual beings, and we're going to create a space where we can hang out with them, and we can be, and I can be their father, and we can be a family together there. And then, of course, we know that human beings really kind of mess that up tremendously. We mess it up first in the fall of Adam and Eve, which as Protestants, evangelicals, that kind of vein really tends to focus all of the fall of humanity on poor Adam and Eve. And in older traditions, in Jewish traditions, in Orthodox traditions, the Genesis 6 narrative, and then like the Genesis 10 and 11, the Babel narrative, are actually seen as more significantly contributing to things like sinful nature and the meta narrative of the Bible than actually what happened with Adam. Because Deuteronomy 32 tells us there's this scenario in Babel that's related to, so God created these people on earth. Hey, hang out with me, be with me, and reflect my nature, right? To be imagers, the image of God, right? To be imagers of your Father, of Yahweh, and then go share that image with people all around the world. Take Eden, this place where our family hangs out together, and grow that all around the planet. Instead of doing that, right, there's this interplay where we try to reflect our own images, our own egos. We try to reflect the image of these other fallen spiritual beings get involved, and they're like, we're going to make people in our image, and we want them to reflect our image. So there's this kind of like ego fight between humans, other spiritual beings, and then Yahweh, and our original purpose in spreading that around the world. So God actually does something that, again, we don't talk about this a ton, where it's called disinheriting the nations, right? He gives over parts of the world, we call it cosmic geography, over to those fallen spiritual beings. Again, we tend to think of it as fallen angels. Angels is a word that really doesn't describe the being itself, but sort of more of the role that they play. And so these nations are given over to these beings. And then, and so Babel, he does this. And then really the rest of the Bible, the entire rest of the Bible, right after Babel, intro Abraham. And God's immediately like, okay, I'm not connected in this family relationship, hanging out with Eden anymore because of what you guys did. But I'm not going to leave you there. I'm going to pick one family, and I'm going to go reclaim those nations back as part of my family. And you guys are going to have to help me now because you screwed it up, right, in the first place. And so, you could take that all the way through the Old Testament until you really get to Pentecost, right? In Deuteronomy 32 and in Genesis 10, we have this thing called the Table of Nations, which is sort of like this weird description of all of the nations that were known at the time, and it's done from east to west if we would look at a map. In Pentecost, many of those same nations are then re-described as Jesus having come to earth, died, overcome sin, overcome the power of evil, distributed that authority in the Great Commission to everyone that believes in him now. And then at Pentecost, he lists those nations get relisted from east to west. And he says, now you guys, as followers, imagers of your Father, as part of that family, are going to go take the Spirit of God into all these other nations around the world. That's what we're doing, right? That is what it means to be in missions. We are part of this cosmic battle that's been going on since before time existed, really. And we're part of this taking back these disinherited nations and saying, no, now you belong to God. You belong in the family. You're part of this family again. It is a massive responsibility. It is an overarching theme of everything that we do in our life, really, if you think about it. And so followership, so that's how I see what Multiply does when it comes to international missions in specifically. When it comes to followership, right? If you think of it only as in terms of like leadership and finding new areas and raising up new leaders, you'll miss the point that the whole thing God is trying to do is create these followers of the Father. To be back in the family. And so part discipleship, becoming in the likeness of Jesus, the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, really the end goal of that is like you need to look like, walk like, talk like, act like you're back in that family, and that's sort of how it's evidenced, right? I think of it like if you're one of Michael Jordan's kids, you got to play basketball, right? And they did. They took it very serious. It was a big part of their life, right? Like if you're in the family of the Father, if you're in the family of Yahweh, if you're in God's family, then you care about love and you care about reaching people, you care about reaching the nations and things like that. So followership is actually a big part of it.
Whoa. Okay. So the last, however long that was, 8 minutes or so, I'm going to probably point people back to that multiple times, because you just did what we would call sort of a biblical theology of world missions in some sense, right? By the way, biblical theology just means like a whole Bible approach to this particular topic, right? And so first really important thought that comes to mind is, was the creation of the world millions of years ago or thousands of years ago? Probably not a discussion for this podcast.
I would say that, I know you're joking, and that's a good joke actually. But in that context, it really doesn't matter, right? It's
right. True. Yeah. I will say though, as you were talking about sort of the pre-existent God with his family, as you said, as you put it, I do hope that one day, maybe when we're with him, we get maybe there's like a little pre-Bible that we get handed before we get into the pearly gates or whatever, however you believe in and all that. But just like to say, this is what was going on before heaven and earth existed.
Oh yeah.
Like I would just love to get to know that sometime in my life in the future.
It's probably pretty wild stuff.
Yeah.
To be honest.
Yeah. So just to stop and think about that is really fascinating, because we really are a vapor of existence in these last 7,000 years or so.
Well, if you take the missions, it's a tiny blip. If you take it sort of one step further, okay, we go to like Revelation 7, right? And we think about that. What is it? It's a big party with God through Jesus empowering his followers to go reclaim those nations. And then most of, or if not all of those people that are sort of reclaimed die. They pass away. Where do they go? They go to be reunited, not just with the earthly family of God, but now the spiritual realm and the earthly realm are connected, and it's one big family of God. Then at some other point, God is going to rebirth the earth, rebirth the physical in conjunction with the spiritual, and there'll be like another level of that spiritual and physical family living together in perfect harmony. Again, doing what? The most important thing I think is that being in that family, being a follower, being engaged in the mission of God, having deference, to Yahweh as the Father, but reflecting his character and his attributes and his desires as a follower of him.
Yeah. Wow. I think that's something we forget about, is that God is going to renew the heavens and earth, not obliterate
the heavens and the earth.
Right. Exactly. Which, so I've told people in the past, so I think when we think of the future with God, the presence with God in the future, it's going to look a lot like what we have, but renewed and better, and what it's kind of, back to Eden, what it was supposed to be in some ways, and I still think God, if we're imaging God to the nations, part of that includes the creativity that we've had over these last thousands and thousands of years in existence, where it's gone from sort of caveman days to like this crazy, updated technology and all this kind of stuff. Like that's actually, I think God champions the goodness of that, the creativity in that and the beauty in that. And I think that's a cool thing. So when it comes to what you just said, what we're trying to do with Multiply is unite around this biblical theology of God redeeming the nations, so that we can be a part of that story.
Mm-hmm.
And we can allow other churches, other simple churches, prevailing model churches, other leaders in other countries that we love and are connected with. We want to be as united as we can in that process right now, because we believe that is what is best imaging back to God what we're supposed to do in our time on this earth. Is that accurate, do you believe?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's becoming a harder and harder thing to do, unfortunately. You guys know I'm a kind of a big stats guy when it comes to missions stuff, or I tend to harp on it at least, that, the rate at which the world is growing right now, just population, or over 8 billion, is you actually hear like Elon Musk, and we're not, a lot of countries aren't doing repopulation levels and we need to have more babies. And there's a truth to that. The other side of the truth is that the population is growing extremely fast in exactly the areas where there is not the presence of God, where there is not a healthy, multiplying, disciple-making church. And if you look at kind of the ratio and the amount of effort that is being given into the sending, as well as the funding and the resourcing of reaching those places, we're being way outpaced by just the population growth itself, not to mention even the growth of other religions and things like that, people living longer, all that kind of complexity. Mm-hmm. So it's my conviction, and I think the Bible reflects this, that the mission of world missions is a mission that all of us should be on as believers in some way or another, and that every local church should be committed to multiplication at the local church level. And this is something that has changed and morphed a lot over the years, where you had, there was a time when missions organizations didn't exist. There were a time when even denominations didn't really exist, right? And there were still people focused on taking the Spirit of God to places that the Spirit of God didn't exist. That somewhere, I believe, deep inside of all believers, where the indwelling of that Spirit of Jesus exists, that same Spirit that showed up on Pentecost is inside of us, and it's saying to us, go to the places where there are no people filled with the Spirit of God, because my family is there. Yeah. They might not know that they're my family. They might not be a part of it right now, really, but we have to go there to bring them back into that family for the rest of eternity and all those things that are to come. And I think there's a danger in saying, well, that's someone else's job. That's a missions organization. And something I love about Multiply and the mission of Multiply and how missions come into it is that we're trying to work at the church level and help churches and congregants be a part of that world missions and taking that Spirit of God places it's not.
Yeah, and I think that we get very comfortable and used to our environments that we're in, and we just enjoy being around people who think like-mindedly, and we love our Sunday morning gatherings. If you're in a prevailing model church, you love your group gatherings in a simple church where it feels familial and really close, and it just feels like, this is it. This is what we're supposed to do. And then you got the guy that comes in the room that's like, no, that's not all we're supposed to do. This isn't all we're supposed to do as a church. There's another element of this that probably some ape, right? That some apostle, prophet, evangelist that's out there like, no, we have a place to go. We have more to do. There's a way bigger things happening out there that we must be a part of. And it's not, like you're saying, it's not just that person. Maybe it's a leader in the church. It's not just that person's conviction alone. It is a biblical mandate to make disciples of all nations. Now, I think that does begin in your local context, in your local church, and in your local space. Obviously, you've got to reach the people that you live around and are close to. I think that one of the I don't know, the negative side of this can be a sort of guilt-driven model or a guilt-driven approach to this, where, I mean, I did missiology for my MDiv at a very mission-focused seminary, and I felt guilty all the time that I wasn't doing enough, Yeah. So can you speak to that a little bit? Just like, how do we also balance this with like, Oh, you've never been overseas doing missions? What kind of
Yeah.
Christian are you? You know, how do we balance that out?
Yeah, and there's a lot of damage that has been done that way for sure. Before I answer that, when you were talking, we need like an ape costume around here, or at least
a mascot maybe in the back,
or at least a mask or something where like when someone's just on their ape, like they're just. And we need to call them back to followership. We can like maybe make them wear the costume or the mask or something. I don't know. I just got that.
What would be like the follower costume if there's an ape and then
a baby ape?
A
shepherd.
A shepherd. There you go.
A shepherd teacher. But I think so.
For shepherd the apes.
Shepherd. The apes are out in front. The shepherds.
Right.
I don't know.
With the staff. We'll just put a staff and an ape.
We can work it out somehow for sure. But I think so strategically, well, so let's say theologically, right? Theologically, God from page 1 of the Bible has claimed providence, has claimed sovereignty over this process. In fact, you could, if you really want to simplify the Bible in one sense, you could look at it as mankind repeatedly messing up this mission that we just talked about over and over and over again. And I tend to look at it honestly as God being like, all right, I'm just gonna have to come there and do it myself. Right. And then enter Jesus.
Yeah.
And then he's like, I'm literally going to die the death that you guys deserve to die. I'm going to live the life that you couldn't live. And then I'm going to do that and then send the Spirit and empower you guys, give you the authority to go back and claim those nations. And then I'm going to send you on the way. He even listed the countries for us, right, to start. Like he just goes over and above. So I think there's this sense where we can all rest in that, right? Rest in the sovereignty of God. In the Old Testament, God talks about he's got everyone that's in his family, he's got them in his hand, and nothing, the powers of evil included, are ever going to take them from his hand. So there's a tension there, and certainly don't understand it all, but I believe firmly that all of those people that are in God's family, his eternal, spiritual, Edenic family, are going to get reached somehow or another. But the way that God has providentially decided to do it is through us.
Yes.
So we have this very important role. I think the second thing I would say is like more strategically is that for many years in the West, that pressure that you're talking about resulted in a lot of people getting up and like, okay, I'm going to India, I'm going to Kenya. And what the missions community has learned is, one, I think that's not really always the biblical approach that's taken. Very rarely, actually, is there an argument anymore in missions for somebody going and this might sound crazy to some people, especially coming from Multiply, but I personally think that idea is reserved only for the most unreached places in the world. And even then, the missionary that should be going should be coming from the closest possible culture possible. Because what we've been doing for the last 100, 200 years, really, when we send, a Nic Lombardi over to India, there is a lifetime of challenges that I have to overcome to try to spread the gospel, make disciples, gather those disciples together, form a church. And to be honest, I'll never overcome all of them because it's just, I'm an outsider. I'll never understand the culture and the applications of the gospel in that culture. And so at Multiply, like, I think what we believe is that you don't have to go necessarily. That in fact, maybe the best way to do this is to find people inside those cultures, inside those countries where the Spirit of God is already working and is empowering them, is gifting them to reach their people, to be imagers and followers of God and back in his family, and then to bring resources to them. Specifically, what I love about Multiply is that when we do this kind of training, when we do this kind of resourcing, we incorporate this idea of followership, that there needs to be a health, there needs to be a humility, there needs to be a deference, there needs to be a zeal, there needs to be a serious following of God and of Jesus inside the leadership itself. And we can bring those things to bear on those leaders, and then they can go reach their own people. So I think the call to missions for most people kind of sitting in a pew is really not as great as they think it is for most people, but there is a participation there.
Agreed. And I think that it's worth repeating sort of and pointing out that the role that we might have in a culture that is not our own is likely an equipping of the nearest person that we know in that culture. Right. So what we've done is we partnered with 3 different nations at this point, and working on some others, but we have India, Rwanda, and Mexico. And at Multiply, what we've decided to do is focus all our efforts on the we'll call them sort of top tier leaders that are really the ones that we know the best, right? Yeah. I don't necessarily know the second guy in charge in those nations, but we know the first guy, and each of them are skilled, gifted in communicating and gathering people and training people. And so we've sort of taken the role of like training the trainers. Mm-hmm. And not that we have an expertise that they maybe don't know about, but that we have some way of organizing the expertise that maybe they're just not as skilled in.
Yeah.
Is that right?
No, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's fine to say. I think that's biblical. I think even if you just consider us or those at Multiply, farther, that got an earlier start to working on church planting and disciple making and missions, then, it's our responsibility really to pass that on to those who are like newer in the faith or newer in some of those obedience-based discipleship and church planting things. So I think that is really the best role that we can play. And so this is where, if you're that, right, if you're the person who hears about this call to missions for the first time, maybe sitting in a Multiply church, and you're like, all right, I got to go, let's see you guys, I'm going to Africa kind of thing. That's like your one option. The second option is to work through your local church, hopefully, or through Multiply, and to say, okay, well, you guys have prayerfully and experientially vetted and met these people that don't have those cultural barriers, that don't have those language barriers, that don't have the racial and ethnic barriers to reaching their own people. So now I can work through that through my church and through the Multiply family and empower that person. And so, that's kind of our function, is those people with the APES gifting, especially the teaching, like you, who can pull together these different resources and trainings and teachings, biblical principles, systems, and things like that, offer them to those people in the country that we've partnered with. They can go from, a 1x to 100x. Yeah. Almost overnight, really. It can have that kind of impact.
Yeah. And so if I could sort of summarize, then we have a Revelation 7:9 approach to world missions, but that all nations will be before the throne, praising and exalting the name of Jesus. And we're saying that the way that happens is God uses his own spirit to work through his people so that nations will be reached and be in that place. And that we're sovereignly trusting that the Lord will do that and working to that end, because we see that balance in Scripture. Yes, his sovereignty in all these things. Yes, it's going to happen, but he's going to use us, people of God, to make it happen. Now, how that happens is what we're saying is like the building the plane as we're flying it kind of thing, right? So we both have different but pretty good size level of experience in international missions and in the international mission field. And so what we're saying is, at Multiply, we're now sort of collecting what we know, what we are doing and have been doing, and trying to now sort of center this on Jesus, of course, and following Jesus. And how do we then multiply followership internationally? Yeah. Right. So this is the discussion right now, that we're saying we're getting close to this place where we feel like we've got a handle on it, at least to be able to say, we know how to make disciples. We have systems and processes and people and all things in place for that. We have a strategy for that. However, we want to make sure that we're applying it contextually and caring for the leaders that are in country currently that we're working with, in a way that helps them see themselves not as, Pope Danny in India, or Guru Danny in India, but truly follower Danny in India that's teaching others to follow as well. Now, once again, I think some of this is where we're trusting our guys in that culture and in that system to apply it appropriately, because there is an elevation of pastors in India that I know of that doesn't exist much here in the West as it used to, right? So he has to be able to, Pastor Danny in India has to be able to say, okay, sure, I am Danny, sort of Bishop Danny, over multiple different churches, but I'm also a follower of Christ. Right. Like we're saying, and we're discovering that even he in that context, and even others in other contexts, need to be able to say, I am one of you, and God's called me to lead, but I'm one of you, and I'm following Jesus too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, I think going back to the sort of we first started, I don't know anyone doing that internationally. Yeah. And I think that we've identified a real danger there in actually reinforcing that many in the missions world or well-meaning folks are actually reinforcing bad leadership, non-followership, whatever the opposite of followership, that totalitarian, and especially if you look at some of the places where, I think of Central America, South America, South Asia, East Asia, actually most of the world, I guess. The authority figures, politically, economically, that you look at, you think of the machismo kind of culture in Central and South America, it really reinforces this leadership model that is not celebrate plurality in leadership. It does not celebrate deference or humility, right? It's the total opposite. Mm-hmm. Any show of weakness or humility is actually a negative kind of view of leadership. So personally, I think that's a big part of our role is, right, how do you teach? And so I think we're mostly talking about teaching and training. That's the core of teaching and training and resourcing, educating, that kind of thing. How do you do that in a way that builds a leader capable of making followers while helping them be a healthy follower themselves? Yeah. If we could do that would be something.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's sort of the next, who knows how long, hopefully not too long, that we begin to work this out and figure that out with people. Leaders, again, that we're working with already, and the people here in the U.S. that are interested in supporting world missions, but maybe don't know how. Maybe they're a brand new church plant, and you got no international mission strategy. You're just kind of plugging along, hoping to make it week to week. Yeah. What we're saying is, we know that we have a strategy for reaching the nations, and we want to find the appropriate field, sow the gospel, raise up new disciples, gather them into churches, and be multiplying leaders and the followers in the process. Like that kind of strategy that we know that we're aiming for is still in place. What we're saying is we are trying to sort of reform that strategy around this realization that the leaders that we're working with must also be not leading like Jesus, but they must be developed as followers of Jesus who lead. Yeah. And it's I know it's a tweak, and you're like, wait, what? You guys, this is not that serious. Like, it's not a big deal. Why are you guys harping in on this? Because we're not seeing it happen. Yeah. Ultimately, like we're really not seeing this happen on a level where it's healthy and thriving and truly multiplying followers of Jesus in that kind of healthy way.
And I would go so far as to say that it's an epidemic in churches. I mean, I feel like every week in America, we discover another pastor who was involved in terrible things, or another leader or elder in that church where those terrible things were happening, that we're covering them up, right? Mm-hmm. There's no way there's no way you could be a engaged, humble, mission-focused follower of Jesus Christ on a daily basis and just kind of fall into that kind of sin. It's not. I don't see. And certainly not as a leader. There's no way.
Yeah.
There's no way. And I think in the U.S. and in the West, I'm hesitant to show those guys grace. And I to be honest, as I've traveled the world, I think there's a lot of well-meaning pastors or leaders who would gladly follow Jesus on a daily basis, but they don't know how to interpret the scriptures correctly. Yet they're in a leadership role and pastoring a church. And I have seen, unfortunately, and especially on the international scene, some rather ridiculous things happen when someone enters into that leadership teaching role and hasn't first been a follower and a learner. And one of the greatest pleasures of my life has been to get to offer the resources to that person who feels called by God to teach the Bible, to grow a family of believers and followers and things like that, but have never been equipped to do it, even for themselves, to be a real follower and imager of Jesus. And then for them to see them get equipped with that, and the joy, the overwhelming joy, and to be honest, the repentance that often comes once they can interpret the Bible for themselves, is, I don't know that there's anything else that it's the most powerful thing I've ever been about. And I think that's what we have the opportunity to do at Multiply.
Yeah. Amen. Well, we're going to continue to work out this strategy and some of the measures and what we're currently doing and what we hope to do with our international missions focus on following Jesus as we multiply. So we look forward to those future discussions coming up here in the next couple episodes, and we will get after it and talk a little bit more about that next time.